Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about my fusion plan for the most skippable fusion of 2024. You've probably seen that title on many other content creators' videos, and unfortunately I can't really disagree with that sentiment, but nonetheless I will be one of the few that are going for her. So the current fusion is the Incarnate, who is basically an incarnation of the Arbiter, and let's dive into her kit so we can understand why people see her as so underwhelming. So starting with the A1, it is a single target double hitter that has a 50% chance to place a provoke, which means combined it's a 75% chance to land a provoke on the target at least once. And then there's a 10% chance, books up to 30% chance of counterattacking when an ally Arbiter is hit. And this occurs once per hit, so if Arbiter is hit multiple times, you have multiple chances to counterattack and potentially cut in and provoke whoever attacked her. On the A2, has a 100% chance when booked of removing all shield buffs from all enemies, as well as another random buff from them, and then places a shield on all allies for 2 turns, and the value of the shield is proportional to her champion's or to her defense, and it is a 3-turn cooldown. And then finally on the A3, team ally protection, and then strengthen on all allies for 2 turns, 3-turn cooldown when booked. And then she has 2 passives that can work independently. This first one here increases this champion's accuracy for each ally under ally protection. So the more allies you protect, the more accuracy she gets. And then whenever this champion is killed, she will fully reset the revive ability on Arbiter, and then basically allowing Arbiter to revive her instantly whenever she gets her next turn. Then the other passive here is it will increase this champion's resistance for each ally under ally protection. Again, the same thing. Once you put out ally protection, you get more bonus accuracy and resistance because the passives work independently. And then she'll also receive 20% of the damage from all ally arbiters, meaning you have a basically built-in ally protection on top of any buffs you place out there to protect your arbiter. And then if your ally arbiter is going to die to a fatal hit, just like a skull crown, for example, it places unkillable on her for 1 turn to keep her alive. So all in all, she's your standard ally protection, shield, defensive tank that's just not going to be that super useful, particularly in the end game. But I do think people are selling her a bit short potentially in the early to mid game. Obviously, it's harder to do fusions, especially a hybrid style fusion, which we'll get into a bit later, of which this one is. But nonetheless, I think she's a little, not underrated, but just undervalued for what she can do for people who aren't quite end game. I think she's basically useless in the end game, but for the mid game and progressing into the late game, I think she can actually do a decent amount of work. So the A1 again can provoke, so she can be one of your champions. If you skipped Wixwell, for example, she can be your head of decay provoker if you're just starting to get into Hydra. She can be very solid, in my opinion, on for your first iteration of a go second team in the arena, because with this passive here, you basically have an arbiter who's now in swift parry, so she can't die, and she's soaking up damage on behalf of arbiter. And if she dies alongside your damage dealers, who are probably a lot more squishy than she is, then arbiter's ability to reset will be off cooldown regardless of what happened previously in the fight. And whenever arbiter gets her turn, because she's unkillable, she can't die, then she can fully revive everyone and then go straight into potentially the increased attack if you haven't taken a turn at all. So I think, again, for a lot of people, that could be a very strong way to make a go second team, or at least your first go second team progressing in classic arena or trying to progress in tag team arena, because a lot of people are pursuing Ramontu. So I think she could be useful for that purpose, but if that's not what you see value in, then fair enough, definitely a skippable fusion. And then I think she could also be quite useful in Demon Lord Clan Boss. Obviously, a nested ally protection team is usually how people start off by getting, or their first Ultra Nightmare team is using that, unless you have some form of an unkillable champion. So she has ally protection on a 3-turn cooldown with strengthen that makes you just take less damage. So you combine her 3-turn cooldown ally protection with some other 3-turn cooldown ally protection champion like a rearguard sergeant, for example, and you could easily have a double ally protection team, and then you can progress into Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss for the first time if that's something that you're working on. On top of that, she does also provide a shield, so you can just take even less damage whenever she puts the shield out there. So she can definitely do a lot of work in those 2 areas. But again, I understand for the end game, and there's a lot of end game bias amongst all the content creators, myself included, that I think that, yeah, she's not going to be very useful past those 2 points. But I think in the mid game, if you have the resources to go for her, she can actually be very handy. And honestly, if you are skipping the fusion and or your end game and you don't really think that you need her, and thus you're skipping the fusion for that reason, I think just getting 1 copy of Slix's Stripehide isn't the worst thing in the world to do. The Lizardman faction honestly doesn't have that many DPS, so I personally would like to have him for my Faction Wars team just to speed it up a little bit. Obviously, I'll be sacrificing the copies I get from the fusion for the fusion, so I won't necessarily necessarily have him unless I pull him separately from voids, but nonetheless, he'd be cool to have. Really quickly through his kit, double hitter on the A1, chance to stun, pretty decent chance, and then another single target double hitter that ignores shield, increase defense and strengthen, and he can heal himself a little bit, a 3-turn cooldown, and then AoE attack here, but before attacking, gives himself increased crit rate, increased crit damage for 2 turns, and then this is on a 3-turn cooldown, so he can just do a decent amount of damage. I don't know what his multipliers are, so don't quote me on him being an amazing damage dealer, but nonetheless, for me, in Faction Wars, any DPS who has AoE, or any champion who has AoE damage is going to be faster than anyone who has single target damage or no damage at all, like a support. So for me, I might want to get him. And then on the passive here, increases his crit damage by 10% every time they kill an enemy. So if he starts getting kills, he can get up to 30% extra crit damage. And then if he kills someone with the A2, then the ability that he uses next could be the A1, could be the A3, depending on his skill rotation. He will ignore 30% of the target's defense. So ideally, he would go A2 into A3 if he kills someone, but you know, you never know how the AI is going to be whenever it gets to a fight. So for the Fusion Champion, I give her probably a solid like B-, C+. That's probably where she ranks in terms of just overall tiers. And so she's not amazing. I'm not going to sit here and say that, oh my God, you have to get her, must get. No, she's not the best champion in the game. She doesn't scale very well into the end game, but I think there's a lot of people that are not end game, and thus she might actually be useful for you if you have the resources to participate in this hybrid style fusion. You can see here the hybrid nature where you get the fragments for the epic, and then you level them up to 50, ascend them, and then you fuse those into the legendary to get her. And we have 2 weeks to do so. So if you are one of the very, very few people that are actually going for the fusion, let's hop over to the spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description box down below if you want to check it out for yourself. And let's talk about anything that is noteworthy about this particular fusion. The overall layout is pretty standard and par for the course. So we have the 4 dungeon split, double classic arena tournaments, champion training tournament, champion chase tournament, which I do suspect to be 2x voids, could be wrong, but I think that's next in the rotation. But rotation is kind of wonky as of late, so we'll just see if they come back to the norm. We have 3 dungeon divers, one of which is a 4-day event. We have 3 artifact enhancement, a champion training event, and then we have a normal summon rush, which starts tomorrow, and then we have a random bonus summon rush only for 2 days, which we'll get to a bit later, but that is in the middle of the week, and I guess it's during Tuesday and Wednesday. It's not a CVC week, but it's equivalent to that time frame where there would be a event going on for that. So the main things I want to call out here is that the second dungeon divers, this one right here, is kind of overlapping a time frame where there isn't going to be a dungeon tournament live, which is kind of unfortunate. You have like the last day of Ice Golem here, so maybe you can hold off on day 2 of Ice Golem and burst most of your energy on the last day of, or the first day of divers here, can't speak, and then kind of do something else. But you're going to have champion training, the champion training tournament coming to an end, and then the dragon tournament starts on the last day. So this might be a region where you're going to have to burn some gems or some energy to actually make sure that you finish the dungeon divers, because you're not really going to be running dungeons according to or relative to the fusion itself. And then of course, it's worth noting that we do have pinch points here, which are just overlaps between champion training and dungeon tournaments. So the entirety of the champion training tournament basically covers all of Ice Golem, and then here near the end, the champion training event covers all of Spider and a little bit of Dragon. So again, you're just gonna have to manage your energy accordingly to participate in both of those simultaneously. And then it is worth noting that the champion chase for the fusion is going to be later on in the fusion. So if you have 2 or maybe 3 of the epics, you can fuse those for some champion chase points and just offset however many shards you might need to do the to get the fusion epic or the fragments for the fusion epic from the champion chase tournament itself, which can be very, very useful. As always, for those who are less familiar, over here on the right side, we have all of the milestones for each of the events and tournaments, and these are accurate going all the way back to the Python fusion. So if you want to go back and take a look at any previous fusion, what the milestones were, see how they're changing over time, you can feel free to scroll down and do that for yourself. But these are estimates. Anything with an asterisk is a predicted value. It is based on historical precedent usually, and sometimes it's just a guess, but usually I'm right to some degree. And then I come back in whenever it goes live. For example, Fire Night is live right now, and I just put in the actual value once it's confirmed. But a lot of these are pretty standard, or at least to be expected. But I will mention, though, that the first Dungeon Divers 4-day event, it's not the dreaded 4450. It's actually the 3750, which is a little bit more advantageous. So that is a good start. But I do suspect that the other 2 3-day long will be the painful 3700 that we have come to love and hate from previous fusions. And then stuff like Artifact Enhancement has been 4775 for a good amount of time, maybe almost a year now. So a couple things worth guessing here is that I'm expecting a little bit higher than the normal champion chase. Usually it's around 2500. I'm guessing it's going to be 2650 this go around, but it could be upwards of 3000. We'll see what happens there. Similarly, for the Summon Rush, I'm expecting a 3150 to be around where it is, but it could also be 3500 there. We'll kind of see, play it by ear. I have honestly no idea what they're going to do for the middles, the bonus Summon Rush, so I'm guessing that there's going to be maybe 2 nodes, because there's 50 fragments up for grabs at 2525, and I'm expecting a lower one and a higher one. So, 4 sacreds worth and then about 8 sacreds worth, maybe. We'll see. I don't know exactly what that's going to be. They haven't really done that, at least not a Summon Rush that short, so I don't really have a good guess, but that's my estimation for what that's going to be. We'll see what happens when that goes live. And then lastly, here at the bottom, I do have my energy plan, which just outlines how I plan to spend my energy over the course of the fusion. It's not necessarily a recommendation, just an outline of what I plan to do on each of the given days, because I prefer to do things on a day-to-day basis, so I focus on whatever's more important. And the thing that's on the left is the thing that I focus more. So I will start off champion training on this day, Sunday, for example, before I get on to Ice Golem for however many I need, however many points I need to do for that day. And because this is a hybrid style fusion, you will need some amount of Ascension Potions. Thankfully, it is just the 4 epics, and so we have a pretty simple layout here. You can take a look at the Fusion Potion Calculator tab here at the bottom, and it just means that you're going to need 24 Superior Voids and then 12 Arcane Superior. So not too bad, just because most people have a significant amount, especially if you're farming Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss for any amount of time. You're going to have a lot of Void Superior Potions, just because a lot less people have a lot of Void champions, as you'd expect. And so that shouldn't really be a problem, but just make sure that you do have the 12 Arcanes. But again, if you're going for the fusion, Arcane Keep is open every day, so it's not going to be an issue. You can literally do that at the last second if you really had to. So hopping back in the game, let's talk about the current events. As usual, let's start off with the overall supply count, because a lot of people do say that fusions are hard, fusions are impossible, it's a free-to-play, and I wholeheartedly disagree. I think as a free-to-play player, they are most certainly possible. You just have to allocate your resources appropriately for the ones that you want to go for. So we're going to benchmark it at about 25 million on the silver and then 4250 on the gems. And then when the fusion comes to a close, I will post on my community tab the results, the deltas from beginning to end, just so you guys can understand how many resources I actually had to spend overall to secure this fusion for myself. So as far as the current events in the game, basically all that is live is the 4-day Dungeon Divers, which we already mentioned is the generous value of 3750. So that's a lot more achievable over the course of 4 days, and 4450 is usually where we've seen it in past iterations, and so that's kind of a nice one. It means that basically if you do the entirety of the Fire Knight tournament, you're going to be somewhere around the 2700, 2800. And then with the champion training that starts near the end, you should be able to finish the rest of it out. So it's not the worst combination in the world, or you can just super cap on Fire Knight. It's not a bad time. I think it's a 3x on a regen gear. And then as we mentioned it, the only other thing live right now is the Fire Knight tournament itself. So be sure to be running Fire Knight if you're caring about the Fusion Classic Arena starting in a few hours on the next day. All right, so that's going to do it for my fusion plan for the Incarnate. And you can let me know if you're going for the fusion in the comment section down below, but I probably already know the answer for majority of you. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below, and feel free to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.